Hey, I have so many things I want to talk about today, so I hope we get through everything. I really wanted to tell you a bit about the prayer, the book about prayer that I'm going through with my friends. Today we didn't even have a chance to learn, so it's a perfect opportunity for me to just summarize some of the things we've already been doing. The past chapters that we've been talking about have been all sorts of. It's written by Rav Shimshon Pincus. It's called The Gates of Tefillah, She'arim B'Tefillah, and it's talks about different ways of approaching prayer, almost different like formulas to use when you pray. So the first four or so, or five even, that we've been going through are all about crying out to Hashem in pain. You know, there's one called Bitsur, which is from the root of tsara, which is just tsaras and things that are going wrong. And then there's Shav'a and Tze'aka and Ze'aka, like all these screaming out to Hashem. And then there's Ne'aka, which is another form of screaming, which is not even like a way of yelling or like just saying to Hashem, die, stop, help me, save me, without any clarification or qualification of what the actual trouble is, like without actually expressing it in words, just a scream. And it's been a little depressing going through all these forms of prayer that are just referring to bad things happening. And slowly but surely we're going to get to the more positive, happy ways of praying. But it seems like there is something wired in us human beings that the best prayers come out of struggle. And which is good, because we've been going through such a horrible year with so many bad things happening one after the other that it's good to know that at least some good prayers can come out of this time. And I do feel it. Everybody feels it. I mean, the amount of tehillim and the amount of prayers and the amount of miracles that we see as a result of these prayers these last few months have been really, really unbelievable. But I just wanted to leave you with this one last point that I think is very relevant to everybody. And he says the following, and it's in the last chapter that we just did. Yishtadel ha'adam hanavon, a smart man, should get used to lehitragel bezeh, to habituate himself, to have a habit, to get used to asher al kol tsa'ar asher korehu, as soon as there is some kind of trouble in your life. Most people don't go through the day without any kind of inconvenience and terrible, it doesn't have to be so terrible, but any kind of trouble, any kind of challenge. As soon as it happens to you, או בכל פעם ששומע על חולה או על אסון או לא טובה השמועה, as soon as you hear about, God forbid, a soldier dying, or the Chabad shaliach to Dubai when he was killed and murdered, or anything that happens in this war, and it's been every single day another tragedy happening, or if you hear about a sick person or a person who needs your tefillah, the first thing you should do, shekofetz halev, when you feel like your heart is jumping, umitno'ea betocho ve'anacha nifletet mipiv, you feel like a sigh, and you just go like that. Take that sigh, take that cry, take that scream. Sometimes it's screaming. I know about me. Every single morning I go out in the car on my way for the day, and I listen to the news, and I'm just screaming. I'm like, no, like I'll do that. And he says, take that. שיכוון מיד הרגש הזה כלפי מעלה לתפילה ובקשה. Immediately have an intention to use that scream or sigh or cry for tefillah, for prayer. Use it, because it's like a diamond. He says these are diamonds. When you cry out to Hashem, and sometimes when you don't even have words because it's so bad and you're just, which, believe me, I have done so many times in the last year, I can't even count. It's a diamond. You can achieve so much with that kind of a prayer. And even if it doesn't seem like it's working on the specific thing that you're asking for, right? But immediately use it and just ask for something. Make sure it goes somewhere towards a tefillah, because it does tremendous metaphysical changes in the world. And Hashem is waiting for those kinds of prayers. Okay? So like, for instance, when I was just like for instance, when this young soldier, who is the most severely injured soldier in all of the October 7th war, Yona Betzalel ben Chava Shoshana, now it's no longer Chava Shoshana, when he passed away just 2 days ago or 3 days ago, yesterday was his Levaya, and I went to it. You know, when you hear something like that you've been praying for such a long time, and this boy went through so much, and he kept sort of being pulled away from the dead, and he kept waking up, and he kept having more and more life. Every single day was such a struggle, such an incredible struggle. He was so severely injured, and he was really critically injured, and he'd never left intensive care for the last year and 2 months. So when I heard that he died, I just screamed. You just scream. And then I remembered, okay, let's take that moment and use it for a prayer. And so I immediately directed it, because we've been learning this so much, and I immediately directed it to, Hashem, you have to stop this war. You have to allow the hostages to be released. You have to. And I was just like screaming in the car, like bawling, And of course I know that all these prayers, it seemingly did not help this one boy, Yona Betzalel. I think his father's name is David, Ben David. It should be his elevation of his soul. But my point is that it still can be used to affect incredible change and incredible good in the world in a cosmic way that we are not aware of, because we don't see the metaphysical reality. We don't see the spiritual worlds. We don't see the next, like the upper world. So you never know. But if you can direct it to something and you just hope that it's affecting change, and if it doesn't affect change there, Hashem will take that prayer and use it for good. So that's my point about prayer. And going back to this, and going back to the Parsha. Okay, I'll see how much time I have for this. This is incredible. Okay, so the Parsha is Toldos. Toldos is the story of Jacob and Esav. Yaakov and Esav, Jacob and Esau. And it's a strange thing about Yaakov and Esav. Like, they both came from the same set of parents. It wasn't even like Ishmael and Abraham, who came from, Ishmael came from a different mother who was not Jewish and or not righteous. And here, these two kids came from the same set of parents, two righteous people, Rivka and Yitzchak. They were amazing. Like, how could you have better parents than that, And yet they went in such completely different ways. And I went to a shiur at the beginning of the week with Shira Smiles, and she brought down, of course, 50 sources, which were incredible and amazing. So I'm not gonna go into it, but she did point out there that every person, even with the same set of circumstances, let's say with the same parenting, they have certain tendencies that they're born with, and they need to take those tendencies and work with them. And sometimes it's easier than others. And sometimes you always have to choose. There's no such thing as you getting like a good deck of cards and then you're set up for life. You're always going to have to choose and make those decisions. And to the extent that you make choices within your realm of circumstances, to that extent, you are building yourself and you are creating your spiritual reality. And she basically said that you have to work with what you have internally, which is your strengths and talents that Hashem gave you. Plus, you need to, respond always to the external situations that are coming up in your life. And what happened is the Torah brings up this one point about the day that it all sort of went south, or the day where the differences between these boys became apparent, is the day that they turned 13. And it was the story with Yaakov making a soup, right? He is like cooking the soup up because Abraham had passed away. Abraham is his grandfather, obviously, we all know. And his grandfather passed away that day, Abraham. Now, Abraham was the epitome of the righteous person in that generation, and he went around his whole life just spreading monotheism and ethics and how to be a good person, how to connect to Hashem, and so on and so forth. So on that day, something very interesting happened. So, and we remember that on that day, when Yaakov was making the soup, Esav came in, and he was like, pour me some of that soup. And then he proceeded to sell Yaakov in exchange for some soup. You know, give me some of that red stuff. He didn't even ask what the soup is. He didn't even check. What is it? Like, what's going on here? Like, there was no deliberation, no intention, no mindfulness. Just give me food. And in fact, pour it down my throat. I don't even need to taste it. Just give me food. I'm very hungry. I'm very tired. And I don't need any kind of, Jewish inheritance or anything. Take my inheritance. I don't need it. And that was when he sold the birthright to Yaakov. And according to the Midrash, on that day, Esav had murdered Nimrod. He had actually committed murder. He also had committed adultery. He also had, he decided he didn't believe in God. There were a bunch of things that he did on that day. But it's interesting that the theme surrounding everything that he did revolves around the idea that Esav was a whole, like a here and now person. He just could not see beyond the physical. He couldn't believe in Olam Haba, in another world, in the world to come. He couldn't believe really in God that's involved in our lives and that's supervising everything. He was too involved in the physical. Now, when you can be involved in the physical, and it's all fine to be involved in the physical. In fact, Hashem would prefer if you're involved in the physical, and within that physical realm, you bring godliness into the world. So that would have been great. He had tremendous potential. And yet, it's also obviously comes with a challenge. When you are so physical and you tend to see everything in the immediate, you need immediate gratification. You can't see long-term results. You can't push off your immediate gratification for anything. Then you're obviously in for a lot of challenges in your life. Now, Yaakov seems like he was much more on the spiritual realm, but because he was a distilled version of Avraham, who was Chesed, and Yitzchak, who was Gevurah, whose strength, he became that distilled version, which is emet, which is tiferet, which is harmony, which is both sides, and he wasn't really as extreme in any tendency. So he had much more of the ability to create that fusion between the spiritual and the physical. But why am I saying this about Esav and Yaakov? Because what happened on that day, which is an external circumstance, which kind of like fed on the internal tendencies that these two boys had. So we know that Avraham died on that day, and we know that Esav killed Nimrod on that day. For whatever reason, I'm not remembering right now what was the issue that came up, why he would kill Nimrod. But Nimrod was the worst man in that generation. Nimrod is the person who had thrown Avraham into the furnace initially all those years ago. So Avraham and Nimrod was the one who would go around spreading the opposite of monotheism, the opposite of believing in God. He would spread like, existentialism, or he would talk about like how there is no God and paganism and so on and so forth. So there was the real antithesis of Avraham in the world, and that was Nimrod. So what happened on the day that you die? Any person dies. You know how they have this idea like your life flashes before your eyes? So Shira Smiles brought this amazing source by Rabbi Wolfson called, what was it called? Wellsprings of Faith. And he talks about this idea that when you do a mitzvah, anytime you do a mitzvah, you're creating an angel. Remember that concept? You create an angel, and that angel comes back on the day of your death to welcome you into the world to come. And it's like, oh, come. And you have all these friends, right, that are coming to help you into that transition into the next world. So if you're a righteous person, you're very lucky because you have all this beautiful, like a crowd of angels, beautiful angels coming to greet you, and friends, and helping you through this transition. And it's a moment of such holiness. And so if anybody is in the room at the time of the death of a righteous person, they must be affected by that incredible spiritual energy of these angels and holiness in the room. Okay? This is for Alyssa. Alyssa, I hope you're listening, because Alyssa's very into what happens in that transition between this world and the next. So, and on the other hand, God forbid you're not righteous, you're actually an evil person like Nimrod, you must have all these terrible angels coming, like bad angels, angels of death, angels of evil, coming to greet you and to take you with them to, nether, I don't know where, like a terrible place, right? So it must be that if you're in the room with a non-righteous person, a very evil person at the time of his death, it must be a pretty, almost like a jolting evil experience. Like there's a feeling of a lot of impurity in the room, a lot of just sullied. Everything is dirty. It doesn't feel like a good experience, and it must have some impact on you as well. So if we think of what happened on that day, on the day that they turned 13, it was their bar mitzvah day. Yaakov was with Abraham, probably with his grandfather who was passing away, who he was sick, and he was with him. And the day that he died, because he was the most righteous man of the generation, and so it must have affected him so positively, whereas Esav, who apparently killed Nimrod, was with him on the day of his death, when all these terrible devils and who knows what, were there with him. So he must have been very negatively impacted and affected by what he experienced. So what I'm trying to say is that you can have your tendencies, and Hashem gives you certain circumstances in your life, but in the end of the day, a lot of things happen around you that might be affecting who you end up being. So, some children, and we don't know really why. Certain children turn out this way, certain children turn out that way. Some people have tendencies that are, not so stable mentally and emotionally. Some people have these challenges, those challenges. The point is that Hashem creates every person with certain tendencies, and that's not up to you. You don't get to choose that. And so you also don't get punished for anything. You don't get credit for it. So, but you do get credit for the choices that you make from that moment on. Anyway, all of that is going to tie up into a little Dvar Torah about the Parsha, as well as something to keep in mind, an exercise to keep in mind with tefillah. Anytime you want to scream out, anytime you're just so angry, upset, who knows what, distressed. Oh, I wanted to say about Yonah as well. I'll say it another time. Okay, have a good Shabbos, everybody.